Welcome to another episode of BetaTalk. This season is being sponsored by Intergas. Please check them out on their website. You'll see that link in my show notes. So, this is just me on this episode. Um, I'm going to title it something to do with, well, House of Cards, the training industry uh, around heat pumps specifically. I think it's a bit of a house of cards, and I think it could come tumbling down at any minute. And the reason I say that is because you and I, the taxpayer, we are now funding a lot of it, and it doesn't work. This episode is going to help you understand a little bit about how qualifications work in our industry. And interestingly, entities that you would think know how they work, like the Heat Pump Association, Heat Pump Federation, arguably don't. There are entities within them associations that do, but you tend to find they're the ones making the money out of this qualification and the fact it's now being heavily subsidised. So there's a lot to get through. There's a lot of acronyms and terms. I'm going to try and help you understand them. One of the interesting things we're going to see after this episode is the actual way this particular type of vocational and technical qualification is set up, and that's what they're called VTQs, vocational technical qualifications. The way it's all set up and designed is actually very good for helping us prove they're not working. So that's a very interesting component. Now we're going to talk a little bit at the beginning about what is the difference between a VTQ and a GQ. General qualification is like what we all do when we're at school. Right? Well, I wasn't GCSEs, I was the last year for O levels, but GCSEs, things like that. They're general qualifications. They work differently to what's called VTQs, vocational and technical qualifications. Now, Ofqual, and that stands for the Office of Qualifications and Examinations Regulation. So that's Ofqual. They did a bit of a deep dive, a bit of research into vocational and technical qualifications around about, I think it started in 2020 to around about 2024. And there's different types of sort of these sort of VTQs. I mean, there's BTEC. Some of you might have heard of BTEC or had kids that have done BTECs. You've then obviously got things like NVQs. Most people have heard of NVQs, National Vocational Qualifications. They're well, as the name implies, they're vocational. Now, Ofqual, when they started to research all these types of vocational qualifications, they came up with a term to classify them, to group them all together, and there's an umbrella term that groups them all together. An acronym is CASLO, CASLO, which stands for the Confirm the Acquisition of Specified Learning Outcomes. Confirm the acquisition of specified learning outcomes. So the way that vocational and technical qualifications are set up, there are learning outcomes. And then them learning outcomes get assessed. Now, one of the things we're going to learn in a minute is you have to master all, and that word is used, you have to master all learning outcomes to get the actual qualification. And that is one of the big differences between a vocational and technical qualification, or what's now being umbrellaed as a CASLO. That is a very big difference to a general qualification. So a general qualification, let's say you are sitting a geography exam and it asks you a question that's kind of going to have like an essay type response. You're going to write a couple of paragraphs. The marking criteria is obviously looking for certain things that you know, but it adds them up. So you might not know anything about a certain thing, and so you're not getting any points, but you might know so much about another point that the examiner is looking for that you understand and comprehend, and you get sort of full marks for that. And then they kind of add the marks up. That is not how vocational technical qualifications work. You have to, what they call, master every single learning outcome. If you don't, if you're assessed and you assessed as not understanding it, you don't get the qualification. That is very interesting because as we're going to see how assessment process isn't really working in this industry. And we're going to see how so easy it is for anyone off the street, or let's say a news reporter or a TV film crew that are really concerned about where all our tax money is going, could go up to people walking out that centre, ask them a few questions, and very easily spot that they don't comprehend a particular learning outcome. So I've also on this episode, when someone's just done a report about skills, I don't really want to talk about it. It wouldn't be fair to the authors. I don't think it's brilliant. But someone summarised it for me using one of these AI tools that we can now use. And they also made a bit of a mini podcast. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. So I uploaded all the off-qual research around cash flow. Actually, I didn't. I offloaded a couple of papers up. There's about 9. And put it into this machine, and it made a podcast. Now, I found the podcast quite interesting to listen to because I kind of knew what it was going to be talking about, and I wanted to see if it was getting things right. It struggles on pronouncing Caslow, which is interesting, but it's 2 people talking. I found it very interesting. It's the first time I've heard one of these AI generated podcasts. I'm going to attach it to the end of this one. It might bore some of you. Some of you might find it interesting. It sort of reinforces some of the stuff I'm going to say. It's going to probably even add some of the stuff that I'm going to miss. So one of the main things I want to get across with this episode is help you understand how our technical qualifications work in this industry. Help you realise that there's potentially a big waste of money going on because we have got entities saying it's a successful. The heat training grant is what it's called. That's funding a lot of the qualifications around heat pumps. So you might find an assessment centre, a training centre is going to charge 600 quid or 650, 500 of that we're paying for. And I think 9,000 people have done that qualification with that grant, and Heat Pump Association, even government, DESNES, are saying it's successful. There's a lot of people that are realising it's not. It hasn't worked. That's what we're calling a house of cards. This could come tumbling down, which would be a good thing because people then can say, right, well, how do we get this right? So we've talked about Ofqual, who they are. You can go and look up their research about CASLO qualifications. Remember, that stands for confirm the acquisition of specified learning outcomes. So one of the big differences between these vocational and technical qualifications and general qualifications, as we've seen, is GQs are allowed to sort of add up the points to give you a sort of an end point, a sum of points, and then you've kind of passed the qualification. That does not happen with these vocational technical qualifications. There are learning outcomes that are specified, and then there's assessment criteria. So AC's, LO's learning outcomes, AC's assessment criteria. And you're told how to assess people on their knowledge of the learning outcomes. There's performance-based. Well, is there performance-based? Most of this is going to be assessed with multiple choice questions, which have their own issues in their own right, and we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, one of the things Ofqual has recognised, which is probably a bit problematic with all vocational technical qualifications, is the awarding organisation has to devolve power. Is that the right word? But the place where you go to get your training and assessed is basically the place that's saying, yes, you have passed. That's another big difference with general qualifications. When everyone sits, when all our younger family members are doing their exams at school on a certain date in this country, thousands and thousands are all, let's say it's the GCS, the geography exam, and they're all sitting that exam. It's going to get marked by the awarding organisation. That's another acronym, AO. So the awarding organisation will train people up that year to be assessors, and they have standardisation meetings to see, how, because they obviously want people to sort of mark it generally the same. Very, very different to vocational technical qualifications. It's a devolved system. So it's the actual assessment centre that's doing the assessing. Now, there is sort of quality assurance in place or accountability. I don't think it works. I think it's extremely bizarre. So I'm a qualified IQA, for instance. So that's internal quality assurance. So I'm a qualified teacher, tutor, lecturer, whatever you want to call me, but I'm also a qualified IQA. So you have an internal quality assurance process going on, and then there'll be an external quality assurance process, which is organised by the awarding organisation. There's only two involved currently, really, with the heat pumps. That's BPEC and LCL awards. So an external QA, quality assurance person, will come out and just see that the internal quality assurance is okay in an assessment centre. Typically, with our country, as long as you've got loads of bureaucracy, lots of paperwork, and everything's being ticked off, you can make things look as if it's you've got the quality in place, and you're completely bypassing whether people have actually learned anything. As long as you've got all your tick boxes checked for, you're tracking people, you're tracking who's done what unit, etc., who's done what learning outcome. You're going to pass your quality assurance process. It doesn't really assure that people have mastered the learning outcome, which is really strange, because anyone listening to this could walk up to a centre today. People are on these courses for 3 days. People come out that course. You could walk up to them and you could ask them questions about a particular learning outcome, and I bet you most people aren't going to know it. And this is the strange thing. So a lot of the assessment going on is with multiple choice. Now, there are other methods, way better methods to assess people, like performance-based assessments. So a performance-based assessment would be something like where, so let's use that scenario. People are coming out of a test centre. They've been given the certificate by the awarding organisation. So the awarding organisation is now saying they have mastered all learning outcomes. They walk out that centre, and within 1 minute, I say, "Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Here's a heat pump." I give them some little tags, and on these tags it says the word compressor or condenser, evaporator, high pressure switch, and all this sort of stuff, low pressure stuff. And I say, right, put that tag on the component you think it is. I know for a fact, because I've been speaking to engineers, they wouldn't have a clue. They don't know what the evaporator is. They don't know what the condenser is. And yet that awarding organisation has given them a certificate that says they have mastered that particular learning outcome. So that learning outcome is going to be learning outcome 1. Usually in all the heat pump courses, learning outcome 1 will be something like, know what an air source heat pump is, the principle of vapor compression. But actually, it's probably going to be learning outcome 2, know all the different bits and bobs. But it's so easy to prove that they don't know it. And this is why I think it's a house of cards, because that whole industry, and I think Ofqual recognise, there is a bit of a problem that the fact it's all been devolved to the assessment centre. The assessment centre is basically saying, yep, you've mastered all the learning outcomes. It's so, this isn't anyone's money funding this. This is our money funding it. Now, another interesting thing is, even though there's this devolved responsibility, 'cause it's not the awarding organisation that's getting involved in assessing people at these centres. They've devolved that responsibility to the actual assessment centres. The awarding organisation, and Ofqual really emphasises this, I think, in that research it did. The awarding organisation remains fully accountable for these qualifications, fully accountable. So that's why I think it's a house of cards, because in essence, the system is kind of, if these vocational VTQs were done properly and people were mastering each learning outcome, it's a great qualification in a way. And that's kind of what NVQs try and do. You're building up a portfolio of evidence. But these sort of short courses, so you've got the water regs, which is a half-day course, these short-day courses, G3, You've got the low temperature one now. You've got these heat pump courses. All right, they're 3 days, 4 days, but they're all being done with multiple choice assessment. Now, some assessment centres are going to be doing it a lot better than others. And let's get this right. There are some great teachers out there. So there's some teachers that are working in manufacture. So some of the manufacturers have their own training facilities, and they have now been given status to deliver an award in organisations certificate. So that's BPEC or LCN awards. So you're going to get some people doing that training who know what they're on about, and they're nice people. It's the system that's completely wrong. I mean, there is an argument. Why should a manufacturer? I mean, some of these massive manufacturers. You've got one at the moment that's got about 7 brands associated with it, and we're talking multiple billions they make every year. Why is taxpayers' money going to them? Because effectively, when you go to a manufacturer to do this course, they can't help it. They're biased. They're going to be promoting their own technologies. So it's a sales pitch as well. I mean, don't get me wrong. I know some of these trainers, they aren't doing it as a sales pitch, but you can't help that sort of unconscious bias. It's going on because you've got all your own makes for kit there. This particular qualification has knowledge-based units and performance-based units, which means you are supposed to have a candidate sort of do stuff with an actual heat pump unit and show comprehension of knowledge. Now I'm hearing there are centres that are just switching a heat pump on, saying, "Doesn't that sound quiet?" And then they switch it off, and that's it. That is as far. That's as near as anyone gets to a heat pump or does anything with the heat pump. Basically, there's cheating going on. Their performance-based stuff is just getting signed off. You've got this real strange situation where the so within the Heat Pump Association, you've got these different tier structures. So you've got full membership, you've got executive membership. There is only one entity in the Heat Pump Association that's to do with training that's got executive membership. They are the ones they're now the biggest training organisation in the country with heat pumps, because I know they knew, and this isn't being I'm not discrediting anyone involved with this company. They knew that heat training grant was coming. So, understandably, thought, well, let's try and teach this all around the country. So they have hooked up with a national merchant, a national plumbing and heating merchant. So they have now got places all around the country where people can go and do this course. And of course, they've got no overheads. The national plumbing merchant looks at it. They've got value because they're getting all these new people coming to their merchant, and they can sign them up and get them accounts, because that's what merchants want. They want you to use them. So they're paying for all the overheads for all this teaching going on. So the training company is only really paying the tutor assessor at this centre, arguably. And we're talking a lot of money now. We're talking a lot of money. I think, like I said, 9,000 people in the Heat Pump Association and the government saying, "Oh, this is great. We've trained." They aren't all working putting in heat pumps. Hardly any of them are. And if you go and ask them, "Do you know actually what you're doing? Do you feel confident?" They will say no. And a real strange tact the Heat Pump Association has took is they're saying, and they've said it on my podcast, I think, but they're saying it in sort of comms pieces now, is, this is your first step. This qualification is your first step, and you can go on and you can get mentored and stuff. Well, I'm probably the biggest advocate for lifelong learning and continual professional development. But you cannot say this qualification is the first step. This qualification is actually saying people have mastered the learning outcomes. So I think the Heat Pump Association have got themselves into a bit of a pickle by stating that. This qualification, the way these particular qualifications are set up, is saying that you have mastered all learning outcomes, because you can't get that qualification. You can't be given that certificate unless you have mastered all learning outcomes. That's the difference between a general qualification, because you can do your history exam and not know something, completely not know something, but know lots and lots about something else that was asked in that open-ended question, and you get all your points and you pass. That is not how vocational qualifications work. You have to show and prove you have mastered each learning outcome, and there's assessment criteria. Now, with the assessment centres, that's easy for them to pass you because they're doing multiple choice. That's allowed. It's the most rubbish way of assessing people. We're a hands-on industry. Performance-based assessment is far better. Take that heat pump apart and get people to give you, say, right, what does that do? How does that work? And you can assess them like that. The reason multiple choice is tended to use is it's so time efficient and effective. It's such a brilliant way of doing things very quickly. But it's not great at seeing if people have mastered the knowledge. And like I say, it's so easy to prove people haven't. Anyone walking out that centre with that certificate. I mean, it don't get put in their hand straight away. It comes through the post sort of thing, or downline on an email. But anyone off the street, or anyone really interested where their money's going, their tax money, or anyone interested in heat pumps could actually say to these people, right, what does the compressor do? What does the evaporator do? What does the condenser do? And I'm telling you now, so many people would not be able to answer that. And that's just one learning outcome. That's just one learning outcome. They're supposed to have mastered that. And this is why I think it's a house of cards. Because even though, like I say, there's devolved responsibility. So it's the accreditation and assessment centres doing all this marking and saying, yes, you've passed. The accountability is still on the award organisation. So it's so easy to prove these systems aren't working. I think the Heat Pump Association needs to have a real good look at this. It's interesting, there's only one training entity as an executive member. Even Octopus Energy isn't an executive member; they're just a full member. Heat Pump Association have so there's, like I said, there's two award organisations associated with heat pumps. That's BPEC, which is a charity. They got awarding organisation status, I think, in 2010. Before that, I think they started around 96. They were a certification body. And then you got LCL Awards, who are not, as far as I know, a charity at all. And they are the ones that have been endorsed by the Heat Pump Association. So the Heat Pump Association have endorsed LCL Awards. LCL Awards are the award organisation for this big training entity that's an executive member. Now, there is a training working group at the Heat Pump Association, and I was chatting to the person that chairs it. Extremely nice person. I really like them. I really like what they're doing. And this is one of the reasons I'm making this podcast, because I want them to think, crikey, is it really this much of a house of cards? Because I understand and appreciate so many people don't understand qualifications and how they work. I mean, still got people in the industry telling me, oh, no, if we need to bring apprenticeships back. And I'm like, well, where do they go? They haven't been. You've still got apprenticeships. And all an apprenticeship is off-site training and on-site training. So you've got an apprentice. He does his on-site training with the employer, 4 days a week, let's say. So the employer is actually the primary learning facilitator. And then they do off-site training with someone like me, a lecturer that's going to train them in the theory at a college. I don't do it anymore. And workshops. So the colleges do the workshop and the theory, and then their on-site training is done by the employer. Apprenticeships have been around for a long time. They haven't been anywhere. Yes, you've had different entities get involved with them. I was the first year of CITB, I think, and when YTS and but they're just entities that get involved. I mean, there's so many entities that do get involved in training because it's a lot of money to be made. But if people out there are really passionate about decarbonisation and decarbonising heat, and everyone's shouting about there's a skills gap. Well, let's really look at how this whole industry is training itself. I'm not really worried about how other trades train themselves. If our industry is now so super important, let's really have a big deep dive into how it trains itself. Not just regurgitating stuff that most people don't know what they're on about. So when I speak to some quite high level people about training, they'll come out with the same sound bites, and I'll say, well, what is the main difference between a general qualification and a vocational technical qualification? They won't know. They don't know. It's all learning outcome based, and that you have to master each learning outcome. Yeah, they don't know this stuff. I'm not saying everyone does have to know it either, but come on, if we got like over 5 million, I think, taxpayers' money's gone into this heat training grant already, and it's now been extended. I know for a fact people are making money out of it. I know for a fact. I think I've said on the podcast before, someone quite near to here said this will be buy me my next Porsche, because you've got people now thinking, oh, well, I can get that qualification. It's very cheap now. I'll go and get it. They're not even going to put heat pumps in. It's just a nice qualification to say you've got. It goes on your website. Oh, well, I'm a qualified this and I'm a qualified that. Another big problem in this industry is there's no evidence-based. So evidence-based came from sort of the medical side way back, not way back, back in the 90s. Evidence-based practice. It's been talked about quite a lot of it in education. Arguably, no one uses it. So there's a lot of evidence about what works, what doesn't work, and we seem to sort of just sweep all that under the carpet. We're not really using evidence-based practice. But like I say, the real interesting thing is that this system that we have got, even though it's not working, this system can prove very easily it's not working. Very easy. And I think that's why it's a house of cards. I think the awarding organisations are going to be in a bit of trouble if they don't actually start to say, right, we need an independent, let's scrutinise how we're doing things. There needs to be an independent inquiry because we are now, this is taxpayers' money, a lot of it. Now, what you're going to listen to now is this artificial intelligence podcast. You don't have to listen to it, it might bore you. But it's going to say it in probably a more eloquent fashion than I am. As you can probably tell, I get quite emotional about this subject. It really frustrates me that not enough people know about it, who should know about it. The only ones that do know about it are the ones making money out of it. And everyone else seems to think it's great. Everyone else thinks it's working, and it's not working. It's not working in the slightest, and it's very easy to prove it's not working. So, yeah, sit back. If you want to listen to this, it's going to talk about the Caslow research, really, that the Ofqual sort of did. It's going to reinforce kind of what I've said, the difference between general qualifications and vocational and technical qualifications. Yeah, hope you enjoy it. And this particular subject, we aren't going to stop talking about it. I don't want to see my tax money wasted. Not at all. And I'm sure you don't. Thank you ever so much for listening.
Okay, let's unpack this. How do qualifications really measure what you know and, maybe more importantly, what you can actually do? You might think, a pass is just a pass, but it turns out not all qualifications are built the same way, especially when you need to prove you're competent.
That's spot on. And it's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking closely at a specific family of vocational and technical qualifications, VTQs, that Ofqual regulates here. They've got a bit of a formal-sounding name, but it tells you a lot. KSLO qualifications.
CSO, right,
Yeah.
And that stands for?
Confirm the acquisition of specified learning outcomes. That phrase, confirm the acquisition. That's the absolute core concept.
Okay, confirm the acquisition. Our mission then for this deep dive is to figure out what that really means in practice. We're going to sort of peel back the layers on how these KSL qualifications are put together, looking right at the building blocks, learning outcomes and assessment criteria. And then, this is the interesting bit, we'll zoom in on what makes them different, something that, well, according to the sources we're using, might make them quite a bit more challenging to pass than other qualifications you might be used to.
Yeah, we're drawing on a gov.uk report that really explains the nuts and bolts of CASTLOs. And to make it concrete, we've also got the details from a BPEC Level 3 award spec, the one for air source heat pump systems, the non-refrigerant circuit side.
Okay, so a real-world example.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of a CASTLO qualification in a really critical hands-on area.
So the focus is this unique structure, this idea that you have to master everything specified, not just, most of it.
That's the crux of it. It's a fundamental difference from qualifications where strengths can sometimes make up for weaknesses.
Right. So how are they built? Let's start there.
Okay. So the gov.uk source tells us that the people designing these qualifications, they start by identifying all the knowledge, the skills, the understanding someone needs for a job or a specific work area.
Makes sense.
Then they break all that down into smaller, manageable chunks. They call these units.
Okay, unit. So a unit could be about, health and safety procedures, or maybe how to use a specific tool.
Precisely. Or installing a component, like you said. And then within each unit, the designers spell out exactly what the learner needs to know or be able to do. They list these as specific learning outcomes, LOs.
LOs. Okay.
Is usually framed quite broadly, starting with things like the learner will be able to, or the learner will know, or understand. They capture the main capabilities for that unit.
So if the unit's about basic bookkeeping, an LO might be the learner will be able to record transactions, something like that.
Good example, yeah. And then comes the next level of detail. To show that the learner has actually achieved that learning outcome, the qualification lays out specific assessment criteria, the ACs.
ACs, assessment criteria.
These are the concrete things an assessor needs to see. Observable actions, demonstrations. They usually start with the learner can. They use active verbs.
Okay. So sticking with bookkeeping, for the LO, the learner will be able to record transactions. The ACs might be. The learner can enter an invoice correctly. The learner can reconcile a bank statement. The learner can identify discrepancies. Those kinds of specific tasks.
Exactly that. You've got it. The gov.uk source gives a simple example from business admin, a unit called communicating electronically.
Right.
Learning outcome 1 is the learner will be able to communicate electronically.
Right.
And under that, you get AC 1.1, the learner can send, receive, and forward emails. And at AC 1.2, the learner can prepare and send a clear and accurate text message. See? Specific actions.
Okay, yeah. Do this, do that.
Yeah.
Very clear. And the example had another LO2, didn't it?
It did. LO2 was the learner will be able to use the internet securely. And the criteria were things like AC 2.1, the learner can log on to the internet. And AC 2.2, the learner can access an appropriate website showing awareness of security.
So the ACs are really the granular steps, the proof points.
The source lists other verbs you often see in ACs, like describe, identify, apply, demonstrate, obviously, communicate, research, examine, review, present. The key is they're things the learner has to show they can do.
I like the metaphor the gov.uk source used, the graphical approach. Units are like maps.
Yeah.
ELOs are the landmarks you have to visit on the map, and you prove you visited by doing all the things listed in the assessment criteria for that landmark.
That's a really good way to put it. It captures that structure. And the goal isn't just to, see some of the sites on the map. It's to cover the whole map. Visit every landmark by completing all its related tasks. That structured, exhaustive nature is key to KLOs.
The entire map. Every landmark. Okay, that already sounds quite demanding. And that, I guess, leads us straight into the big difference you mentioned earlier between these KLOs and, say, general qualifications like GCSEs or A-levels.
This is absolutely central. This is where that phrase, confirm the acquisition of specified learning outcomes, really shows its teeth. KLOs work on what the sources call a mastery principle.
Mastery.
Which means, quite simply, a learner must acquire all of the specified learning outcomes, every single one, within a unit, and ultimately for the whole qualification. They have to meet at least a satisfactory standard on everything.
Whoa, hang on. All of them. Not just get a good average score. What if you're brilliant at 90% of it, but struggle with one small bit?
That's the critical point. That's the implication. To pass a unit in a CSLO qualification, you have to meet every single assessment criterion for all the learning outcomes in that unit, period. There's no mechanism for being really good at AC 1.1 to make up for failing AC 1.2.
Okay, wow. That sounds genuinely tough. That is so different from how I remember my A-levels working. You could mess up a question, but still do okay overall if other parts were strong.
Exactly. That's the contrast. General qualifications, GQs, like GCSEs and A-levels, they typically use a compensatory approach. Think of exam marks. You do brilliantly on Section A, Section B, maybe not so great on Section C. Your total mark adds it all up. Strong performance compensates for weaker performance.
Right.
Different people can get the same overall grade with very different strengths and weaknesses across the paper. The source compares it to a city guide. You get the overall flavor, but you don't necessarily have to tick off every single specific landmark listed.
Yeah, the gov.uk source had that fantastic example comparing a BTEC pet services unit with an A-level geography assessment. That really hammered the point home for me.
It's a stark comparison, isn't it?
Yeah.
For the A-level geography NEA, that's the non-exam assessment, the source explains how, say, 4 judgments or marks are given, and then they're just summed up.
Added together.
It's compensatory. So the source gives this hypothetical. Student A gets marks like 5, 10, 15, and 10. Total 40.
Okay.
Student B gets 7, 8, 18, and 7. Also totals 40. So even though their performance profile across those 4 areas is quite different, student B was weaker on some bits, stronger on another, the compensation means they end up with the exact same total mark.
The difference is just average out.
Precisely. The source says discrepant judgments can average out to no difference at all in the overall mark total. The final mark doesn't necessarily show you where they were strong or weak, just the sum.
Okay. But then the BTEC pet services unit example. Completely different story.
Totally different logic. In that BTEC unit, there were 6 assessment criteria, 6 specific judgments to be made. And crucially, each one counts individually. There's no adding up.
Right.
The source shows it simply med plus med plus med plus med plus med plus med equals to pass. Straightforward. But if even one of those is not met, so maybe med plus med plus med plus not plus med plus med, the overall result for the unit is fail. Or, technically, not yet met.
Just one criterion missed means you fail the entire unit, not just lose some marks, but you actually don't pass that whole section.
That is the absolute essence of the KSLO mastery model. You haven't confirmed the acquisition of all the specified outcomes for that unit if you couldn't meet one of the required criteria. The source is really clear. Each and every AC judgment is critical to the overall judgment of competence, which is far from true of GQs.
Wow.
It's what the source calls assessment being defined conjunctively, meaning you need all the parts together, complete mastery, versus being compensatory, where it's just the sum total that matter.
Conjunctive versus compensatory. Okay. That's a huge difference. It feels like a much, much higher bar for consistency across everything that's required. So let's bring in our specific example, the BPEC heat pump qualification. How does this play out there?
Right. The BPEC Level 3 award in air source heat pump systems, non-refrigerant circuits, our second source. Now, this isn't just any qualification. It's the minimum ticket needed for installers working on the wet side, the heating system side of these increasingly common heat pumps. Installation, commissioning, maintenance. It's safety critical stuff. Okay, so important for getting the job done right. How does BPEC structure it? Does it follow that unit LOAC pattern?
It does. According to the spec, it's built around 2 mandatory units. You have to do both. Unit 1 is the knowledge unit. Its full title is Know the Requirements to Size, Select, Install, Commission, and Hand Over Air Source Heat Pump Systems. Non-refrigerant circuits.
Catchy.
Yeah. It's got a reference number, M6502399, and it's about 12 guided learning hours. This is the theory, the understanding.
Okay, and Unit 2 must be the practical bit.
You got it. Unit 2 is the performance unit. Plan, prepare, install, commission, and maintain air source heat pump systems, non-refrigerant circuits. Reference D6502400, about 8 guided learning hours. This is the hands-on demonstration.
So how do they assess these tests, watching you do stuff?
Both. The BPEC spec says Unit 1, the knowledge, is assessed with 2 online multiple-choice tests. Unit 2, the performance, is assessed through practical tasks. The assessor observes the learner doing the job, usually in simulated controlled conditions. Okay, makes sense. Knowledge test, practical observation. But here's the key question then, linking back to the KSLO idea. How do you actually achieve the overall BPEC qualification? Right. You just need, say, 70% overall across both units.
No. This is where the BPEC document makes the KSLO mastery principle crystal clear. It states quite plainly, the qualification will be achieved when all necessary units have been completed.
All necessary units.
All necessary units. And just in case there was any doubt about that conjunctive all-or-nothing nature, it adds this. If a learner does not complete all the units necessary to complete the full qualification, no certificate will be issued.
No certificate. Full stop. So there it is. You have to complete Unit 1 and Unit 2. And based on everything we've just discussed about KSLOs, completing a unit must mean hitting every single learning outcome within it, which means meeting every single assessment criterion tied to those LOs.
Exactly. No crossing things out, no averaging. You can't pass the knowledge test with flying colors, but fail on a critical practical task in Unit 2 and still get the qualification, or vice versa.
Or even within Unit 2, presumably, you can't be great at installation, but mess up the commissioning part and still pass Unit 2.
That's the logic. Each AC, each LO, within each mandatory unit has to be met. This BPEC qualification is a textbook example of the CKSO model in action. It defines competence through those detailed LOs and ACs and demands you prove you've mastered all of them.
Okay, so let's pull this together for you, the listener. If you're taking a qualification like this BPEC one, structured as a KSLO, what does this mastery requirement really mean day to day?
Well, the biggest thing, as we've hammered home, is there's no hiding place. You absolutely have to be competent across the entire specification. Using the BPEC example, if you ace the theory test in Unit 1, but you consistently fail to, say, correctly set the system controls during the practical assessment, which would be a specific assessment criterion in Unit 2, you haven't met the standards for that unit.
And therefore,
you don't get the qualification. Not until you can demonstrate competence specifically on setting those controls correctly. That gap has to be filled.
So that's why the sources talk about these potentially being harder to pass, because one single failure point on any required criterion can stop you in your tracks. unlike in a compensatory system.
That's precisely it. The gov.uk source calls it a more exacting assessment standard, that standard being mastery of all LOs. Because there's no compensation, failing even one AC means you haven't passed that component. And if that component is part of a mandatory unit, well, you're blocked from the final qualification until you fix it. It's fundamentally different from a GQ, where losing a few marks here or there often doesn't prevent you from getting the overall pass grade.
It must mean the assessment itself is pretty intensive then, to check off every single item on the list for every learner.
It seems so. The gov.uk source does mention that KSLOs tend to carry a heavy assessment burden, because the standards are laid out so fully and they have to be assessed exhaustively to confirm that every piece is in place. Assessors are making lots of specific, granular judgments.
Right, it's not just assigning a single grade, it's a checklist, almost. But surely the aim isn't just to make it hard. Is there support built in?
Well, absolutely. The goal isn't failure. The goal, according to the source, is for learners to actually reach that defined competence.
No.
The rigor is in the standard, not necessarily in being punitive. The system is arguably better at identifying exactly where a learner needs more help or practice because it pinpoints the specific AC or LO they haven't met yet.
Oh, I see.
The source suggests this model works best with a continuous assessment approach, meaning lots of feedback along the way, formative assessment. You get told, okay, you haven't quite got this bit yet, let's work on it. The underlying expectation is that with enough effort and the right support, learners ought to be able to reach competence sooner or later. The final assessment just confirms when they've got the whole package.
So it's demanding because you need that complete mastery, but it's also potentially quite supportive in getting you there because it tells you exactly what's missing. It's focused on ensuring a full set of skills.
That's a good way to put it. It's about building confidence for the learner, for employers, for the public, that someone holding that specific SECSO qualification really does possess the full range of required knowledge and skills. No major gaps.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, we've explored these KSSO qualifications using the BPEC Heat Pump Award as a key example. And the defining feature is this non-compensatory mastery model. Achieving the qualification means successfully demonstrating every single specified learning outcome by meeting every single assessment criterion.
A fundamental difference from the compensatory approach you often find in general qualifications, where the total or average performance is key.
It's about confirming competence across a very specific, defined set of requirements, piece by piece.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If vocational roles, especially safety-critical ones like heat pump installation, really demand competence across all necessary tasks and knowledge, does this XSLO model, with its insistence on meeting every single criterion, actually give us a more reliable guarantee of skill in the workforce compared to systems that allow strong areas to compensate for weaker ones? What does it really mean for how we define competence and how we best prepare people for specific jobs?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? About what level of assurance different qualification structures provide about someone's readiness for a role. Definitely something to think about.